Fundamentally, like nothing feels really hard to build or replicate in native
Yeah.
AI. What a lot of startups are doing right now is they're trying to build acquisition before retention. So there's this kind of roller coaster of you get a bunch of people trying it, and then it goes like
Yeah.
down.
Is there any part in this that you feel, let's say, teams are over indexing, which is like, this is like a lot of hype at this point in time, versus under indexing, where
A lot of people are saying like, look, the new distribution channel is going to be, AEO, right? Like search engine optimization. And I think that's largely a trap for most companies. Then like the LLMs have openly stated that they want to build agents that do just that for every vertical, right? The incumbents are smarter about, doing that well. And they're just doing it a lot faster this cycle
Yeah.
than they did last cycle.
Yeah.
And now it feels like you have to do it every year. Things just change too quickly. Right now, we're early enough in the cycle that people are growing revenue and users really healthily without that. But I think the rug's going to get pulled out from them, eventually, let's call it by 2030 at the latest.
It's going to tank. That's true. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. In a world where generic co-pilots can answer any question with confident, bland paragraph, the real bottleneck isn't information. It's access to the highly skilled operator judgment that actually moves a business forward. Casey Winters is rebuilding this layer. As the co-founder and CEO of Superme and one of the most trusted growth advisors in the Valley, he's turning private work such as docs, notes, talks, and realty sessions into AI profiles that you can actually talk to, so founders can tap the instincts of proven operators instead of AI slop. In this episode, we'll dig into how his thinking on distribution and moats has evolved in the AI era, why he believes AI is a technology shift more than a distribution shift, and how SuperMe is trying to protect human expertise in a world full of autocomplete. And this is Casey's second time of being on the show. Casey, thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So growth has always been an on-demand job, Casey. And with AI, I'm only seeing that there are more roles that are coming up in every company pertaining to growth. Has growth as a function evolved from, let's say, being there for SaaS first companies to now AI first companies? Do you see anything particularly that's standing out?
Yeah. So, the concept of like growth as like separate or different from marketing started with consumer internet, because with software, you could change it. And it turned out a lot of the biggest drivers of, growing users or growing paying customers with software was like a change to the product that made it more accessible, whether that was to search engines or made it more viral or retained better, monetized better, things like that.
Yeah.
And so that concept of, efforts in the product to drive growth made its way into B2B SaaS over the
Mm.
last decade. And I think in both kind of consumer internet and in SaaS, before AI, we typically talked about companies having like distinct phases. There was a 0 to 1 phase to, get to product market fit.
Yep.
And then post product market fit, you just started emphasizing a lot of efforts on growth, right? Let
Yeah.
me go get more customers. Let me make it easier for them to find value, make it easier to monetize, all of that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
then way later, if a consumer business, you might eventually, invest in some new products. And, maybe 3 to 5 years later in B2B SaaS, you would invest in new products and sort of expand a suite. I think the change with AI is that due to both rapid underlying model improvements as well as the cost of product development going down with AI coding tools,
Hmm.
it feels like you have to do a lot more product reinvention along the
Right.
way and net new product development, meaning like new features, new product value being developed to drive that growth,
Hmm.
rather than just being like, I have sort of a stable core product and I just try to get more people using it, more people paying for it.
Hmm.
So there's much more of a blend between what we think of as, growth work
Right.
and, new product development work, new product reinvention sort of work. I mean, we used to not think about product reinvention until companies were like 15 years old.
Yeah.
And now it feels like you have to do it every year. Things just change too quickly.
Yeah, true. And it's almost like not even every year, I guess, with the AI. It's every couple of weeks, there's
Yeah,
a
that's probably
new
generous. Yeah.
exactly. And it's a very interesting point too, because when you started out as what growth felt like for consumer internet and SaaS, it almost feels like, oh, we're talking about acquiring people, expanding the business, and then keeping it sort of like going very steadily. But I think with AI, the newness as in the product roadmap also gets to be very much a part of the growth engine. So it's not just
Yes.
that you want to grow in terms of the users and broadly, but also grow in terms of the product coverage and what it gives. That's interesting.
Yep.
And is there any part in this that you feel, let's say, teams are over-indexing, which is like, oh, this is like a lot of hype at this point in time, versus under-indexing, where it is still the most important work, but it's unsexy and like a lot of compounding has to happen. Has that quotient changed in an AI first business?
Well, I think what you're seeing with startups, at least, is a reaction to the fact that while there's been a lot of innovation in what they can build, there hasn't been a lot of innovation in where they can find cheap customer acquisition. So,
Hmm.
what's strange right now is, I define product market fit as satisfaction that creates sustainable growth. And what a lot of startups are doing right now is they're trying to build acquisition before retention. That
Right.
might be like, on TikTok or something like that. And retention is usually the main indicator that you have, satisfaction. And so what that means is like you're doing a bunch of effort to drive hype that doesn't create that sustainable growth because the
Yeah.
people just, don't stick around. So it seems like wrong on both fronts. You're not creating satisfaction and therefore you're not creating sustainable growth. So there's this kind of roller coaster of you get a bunch of people trying it and then it goes like straight
Yeah.
down. And I think part of the reason for that is the like venture capital industry sometimes rewards that hype with more capital, and
Yep.
that gives you more, shots on goal. But again, a very small part of your role as a founder is to play the investor game versus the like customer and user game.
Hmm.
And so I don't think people are think they're over indexing on the venture capital game. I just think people are starved to find ways to get attention for their products, and they're doing it in pretty inefficient ways,
Right.
bringing in either the wrong customer or bringing them to the wrong product because the
Hmm.
way they can drive attention doesn't match the actual product value that they can create.
Right.
So there's still a lot of mismatch there I'm seeing versus like, okay, well, how strong is our retention?
Hmm.
How well can we monetize retention and how can we reinvest,
Yeah.
satisfied users and the money we make from them into, good ways to acquire,
Hmm.
more customers, more users, things like that. So I think there
Right.
is a bit of a mismatch. And I think that will evolve over time as this next generation of founders get smarter about
Hmm.
acquisition.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And does velocity actually have a reason to play in this? Because just a minute back, we were talking about how release cycles, all of these AI advances are happening with speed. So I'm also assuming that with that speed, let's say there is a certain, model launch or there's a certain feature or a module launch this week. And then
Yep.
we don't have enough time to even like let alone have people see it, let alone have
Right.
people use it, and then 2 weeks later there's something else. So does speed, as much as it helps really in other things, actually play a sort of anti-role here, you think?
Yeah, I think the environment we live in right now in tech is creating the impression that it
Mm,
is impossible to keep up with the
yeah.
industry. So there are people who try to take the lead on like, I'm going to explain to you what matters. The game has changed sort of post on, LinkedIn and X type stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's good for content creators, but that's not necessarily good for us in terms of building products.
Mm,
Uh, so I think it comes back to um, for most, not all companies,
mm,
the Steve Jobs logic of like you have to start with the customer problem and then work backward to the
right.
technology. As long as you know what you're focused on, which problems you're trying to solve, and
Mm,
then you're looking into what are these new tools coming out that I could potentially add to my toolbox to solve those problems better, then you're going to be in like a fine position. If you think
mm,
you have to rethink everything with every new OpenAI or Anthropic or Gemini
right.
announcement, then you're gonna just be like consistently distracted from what your actual like customer is telling you,
Mm,
and that's where things can get off the rails, right?
right.
So I think, we're learning obviously a lot, building SuperMe,
Hmm.
but we know like what we're trying to build, we know who we're trying to build for. And
Right.
then when there's a technical problem related to that, then we
Hmm.
go look in the market of like, has anything come out recently that's going to help us?
Right.
And if not, like how far can we go
Hmm.
in developing the ultimate solution we want? And when might there be another unlock technologically that helps us get like closer to the
Hmm.
best possible outcome we're looking for?
Right. So in some sense, it's also like keeping away the noise, rather like not constantly falling into, hey, what's this hype cycle all about? And what are the other 10 tools that do the same thing versus like really going back to the fundamentals of problem solving. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Fair enough. And also one shift in the same theme that we're talking about. So because we're going back to the problem solving and really trying to understand the core purpose, so does this also mean growth strategy is no longer about just the release cycles, as in founders cannot think that, oh, like now this week we're adding AI to the cycle. So it means shipping AI features is equal to building a distribution mode, or that's my growth strategy. What do you see as wrong or right in that attitude?
Well, I think so. First off, I think companies are getting better at this. So,
Hmm.
you know, let's call it a year and a half ago, a lot of people were just like, slapping AI onto
Yep.
the side of something and being like, well, now I'm an AI company and I have this AI product. You should pay more for it. And people like, A, I'm not using it. B, I'm definitely not paying more for it. And so now people have moved on to the kind of the next evolution of the cycle, which is like, no, I've actually built something we couldn't build before
Hmm.
that's AI native, that's actually helpful.
Hmm.
And the problem with that is not that people aren't using it. In many cases, people are using it and it's growing quite rapidly. It's that, well, everyone else can do that too. So if there's no differentiation between, this sort of magic trick that AI enables,
Hmm.
then long term there isn't going to be, any distribution advantage or any like revenue advantage. That feature will just become free with dozens of startups and incumbents alike having built something very similar. So
Hmm.
then you're back to kind of the more traditional phase of like, well, how is what I'm building creating a compounding advantage over time?
Hmm.
And will I have enough time to create that compounding advantage, before it's a commoditized product? And that's, network
Right.
effects or, deep customer integration,
Hmm.
uh, you know, um, and I think the problem we face right now is people are running a playbook with this new technology as if it's the last sort of technological evolution, which is SaaS. And a lot of SaaS wasn't built
Hmm.
on network effects or brand or
Yeah.
even like switching costs. It was built on like, yeah, the thing I built is hard to build and hard to
Hmm.
replicate. And fundamentally, like nothing feels really hard to build or replicate in the age of
Yeah.
AI. So
Yeah.
even if you've got, a lead and you've built something really cool, a company that is definitely much larger than you can
Hmm.
build basically the same thing in a few weeks.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
true.
and that creates a lot of challenges for startups. So I think there needs to be more thinking about long-term
Hmm.
defensibility and differentiation. Right now, we're early enough in the cycle that people are growing revenue and users really healthily without that. But I think the rug's going to get pulled out from them.
Hmm.
Eventually, let's call it by 2030 at the latest. And if you haven't like built something more defensible by then, that
Yeah.
revenue growth is just going to go away really quickly.
Yeah, it's going to tank. That's true. And in fact, as we're talking about differentiation, I'd love to get your take on. So, whatever we're talking about applies to two layers, right? One is the application layer that we're talking about, which is there is
Yeah,
SuperMe, there's like bunch of other app founders who are building on top of these models. And the other layer is actually the core model layer, which is what
yeah.
OpenAI, Anthropic, Perplexity, a lot of these actual model companies, frontier companies are working on. So does the same logic apply to both of these, like both app founders and these model founders? Because when we talk about differentiation, what does differentiation really look like? Let's say for even these core companies where everybody's now competing to have a coding agent. Everybody is now like
Yeah,
launching left, right, center image model. So what's
yeah.
differentiation really like in this setup? Like, has it even changed in its meaning from what it is for an app cycle versus a model cycle?
I think when these models came out, we
Hmm.
thought they were so hard to build and required so much capex that they had the technological differentiation,
Yeah.
and that was going to be a sustainable form of defensibility. And I think that has just not proven to be true, right? In that, if you, at least if you look at, there are enough companies who have put in the capex work, who have put in the model work, who have the right AI researchers to build largely competitive and very swappable products. And that's Gemini and OpenAI and Anthropic. Maybe you
Yeah.
could throw Grok in there, right?
Yep.
And so those companies, there are some ways in which the way they build product has to be fundamentally different, right? So
Mm.
as an application layer company that's building a network effect oriented product, we obviously sit on top of those companies, and those are tools to help us build value, for our users, and ultimately our differentiation is going to be the network we build,
Correct.
and that's going to be our defensibility. Um, but for them, I think what they've seen, which was a little bit surprising, is that okay, if I come out with an innovation on image models or on web search or something like that, it's 3 to 6 months before it's available in all the other model provider companies. So they're like, okay, well, our tech isn't differentiated. But I think there is an element that's different if you're working like as a PM in those companies,
Mm.
which is, as I mentioned, kind of how Steve Jobs, taught us all, 30 years ago of like, start with customer problem, work backwards to the technology. That is not how things work at the model provider companies.
Yeah.
It's AI researcher hands you magic beans. You then need to figure out what those magic beans are most interesting to use for and,
Right.
commercialize, that. And so that's not what we do, obviously, at SuperMe, but that is an important part of the role, at say, OpenAI or Anthropic, things like that.
Right.
But you're in a position at the model provider
Mm.
companies where you're like, okay, I'm growing really quickly, but I might need to think about defensibility just as much as my customers. So if you take a look at what's happening at OpenAI, and I don't have any insider information there or anything, but they're launching these tools intended to like give them shots on goal at network effects. Like Sora is not released an image model;
Yeah.
it's we built a social network, with the video model underneath, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and you could think of, Pulse is trying to layer in more personalization
Yep.
to build, data network effects, their investments in memory. So they're trying to think about like, how do
Mm.
I um, take all these users I got virally and sort of lock them in so that, if Anthropic comes out with a better model tomorrow, I don't
Mm.
um, I don't lose them. And
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance that effort will work. It's just a shift in strategy. The other part that you mentioned is around how they all seem to be playing in all the spaces. And
Mm.
as a fundamental like startup guy at heart, that's where I've spent most of my career. A large part of strategy is saying no, like saying no to a bunch of good ideas so you can focus on the best, most differentiated one for your particular business. And what happened last generation is certainly what's happening this generation is companies that get overfunded feel like they can say yes to everything. So
Mm.
if you're OpenAI and you have this big consumer lead with ChatGPT, that Gemini is coming for, but you also have some of the best researchers, on the planet, and Anthropic's better at coding. You're like, wait, why should I give that market up, right?
Yep. Mm.
Or enterprise, like, hey, I should also have ChatGPT winning enterprise. So, as a startup guy, the way it works in my brain would be like, well, Gemini's going to win developer tools, Anthropic's going to win coding, and ChatGPT's going to win consumer. Why don't you
Mm.
all just focus on the areas,
Exactly.
each of which is worth multiple trillion dollars,
Yep.
and just go fortify,
Mm.
your winning strategy there? And that's not what all three of them are doing. All three of them are trying to play in all the spaces.
Yep.
And I think what you saw last generation is what you'll see again, which is if there's any sort of crunch in
Mm.
funding or economic cycle, they'll start to make harder decisions strategically
Right.
on where they play, right? And they will make probably the most obvious decisions they could be making now, but
Mm.
they're sort of a like, well, I got infinite capital, like why limit
Mm.
myself? Because if I
Yeah.
do have a 20% chance of coming back and winning the coding market, and that's worth an extra $4 trillion in market cap, and then yeah, I'm going to take that chance. I personally don't like that way of playing.
Mm.
I like to be incredibly focused in what we do,
Yeah.
but I can understand why it feels hard to say no
Right.
to things like that when you have this excess talent, when you have excess compute, like all of those sorts of things that allow you to play that game. And if
Yeah.
these aren't winner take all markets and you're each cutting them by, a third or a fourth, then that's another reason you feel like you need to play that game
Mm.
to generate the type of return, based on the capital you've raised. But
Right.
this is something that's rapidly evolving at the model companies. I do think they'll get better at strategy. You have to remember most of these are started as research projects, not as traditional businesses. So
Yeah.
they're like learning this stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you can't expect them to make like every perfect decision every time.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And a lot of this is like at an exploration stage. And I think the market is also now very comfortable accepting these experiments from even leading providers. I was just telling a friend this morning that a decade ago, people were just so not okay with Google doing these experiments. And they always used to
Right.
have questions around, oh my God, like why is Google naming their product so differently? But look at Nano Banana today. Everybody's like going nuts over it. And then people are like constantly exploring it and embracing that particular experiment from Google. So
Well, and
yeah,
one of those
that's
experiments prior to that was Waymo, right? Which
yeah,
is just such an
exactly.
amazing product experience.
Yep.
It's growing incredibly quickly. Yeah.
Exactly. Very true. And it has been happening since like acquisitions of either like existing other products or newer experiments from within. But I think the mindset to kind of embrace that and play along with it is definitely come through. So I totally second with that concept of yours. And you're right. With I think the free money is definitely making everybody want to compete. And I also maybe think hearing from you that is it because all of them are currently focused on the discovery engine part of it, because when it comes to the retention part, which you just told a couple of minutes ago, then it only makes sense to go very niche into what really the particular brand would do for sure, which in case of Google and the rest is going to be more around developer tools, and with Anthropic it's a different thing. But I guess at this point in time they're also like way too much focused on, oh, like I want more people to discover, I want more people to like start using this. So maybe it's also because of that.
Yeah. So I think that makes sense for Google because they're trying to protect, their
Mm,
current leadership position as a search engine and driving discovery across the internet.
yep,
And ChatGPT is the first legitimate threat to that in
exactly.
15 years,
Mm,
right? That makes less sense for Anthropic
mm,
to be investing in, to me,
mm.
given the lead that they have in coding and how powerful that is as a use case.
Yeah,
But yes, that's like a defensive,
right.
that's like a big assault on their core business that they needed to react to. And, up until recently, they even though they invented a lot of this stuff, it felt like pretty impossible for them to react to ChatGPT. They finally figured some things out internally and on how
Yeah.
to commercialize their tech, which has always been amazing. And that's like now going to be very interesting to watch between those two companies and how they duke it
Yep.
out for consumer mindshare.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I won't pretend to be able to predict that in any way.
No, I think the best part is to kind of let it, roll it out and then sort of like see it in action. But yeah, that's so true. And I don't know if this is also a part of the growth engine part of it. But then what I also noticed in the recent times is the focus on a lot of dog fooding when it comes to models, and literally having the entire company post about the outcomes of it. Like we saw how every second person in Google spoke about like playing around with the AI studio or playing around with these image models like Nano Banana. And then every Anthropic executive talking about how this is being useful. And same thing goes with ChatGPT when they launch, let's say, Pulse or a ton of other features. So what I mean, well, this happened in SaaS as well, but not as popular as how it's happening now, where people are literally dogfooding their own stuff and then using that as sort of the social moat to go and make their employees talk about it. So I don't know if that also adds to
Yeah.
the growth engine angle of it.
Well, I think there's two components. One component is, and I think OpenAI has done a really good job of this, is that if the biggest growth impact is going to come not from, let's say, optimizing my onboarding flow
Mm,
or getting more people to share, but by inventing a use case with a new model change that can go viral and get me 100 million extra users, which is, the Studio Ghibli example, with
yeah.
their image change, then part of the job as an employee of those companies is like you need to play with the product to figure out how
Mm,
we can best position it and maximize its usage, right? And obviously that was a pretty novel use case that OpenAI came out with. And Nano Banana was a replication of that similar strategy.
Yep.
Um, and Sora was also a replication of that. We'll see if long term that's as successful.
Yep.
So it's a bit part of the core job.
Mm.
Secondarily, and I think what you were getting at with the question is that also there are no new distribution channels to be reaching people, and all of this first wave of AI has been productivity focused and a bit like bizoomer in nature.
Yeah.
There's
True.
certainly the pure consumer fun stuff like creating the videos and images for yourself and your friends, but
Mm.
more of it has been on like productivity bizoomer type work. And well, then what's the best distribution for that is people talking about the work that they're doing, right? And whether that's
Right.
internal companies becoming influencers or
Mm.
then going to content creators and getting them to talk about their workflows that they're using, right?
Yeah.
That like I don't know if you listen to the Doorcash podcast, but
I
like
do.
all his
Yeah.
ads are basically like, I went and used this new Gemini tool to do this big,
Yes.
complicated thing that the AI
Yeah.
researchers listening will understand. And I mean, the ads are just really good as a result because they walk through the entire workflow and how they
Yep.
use the tool. And so that's a new emergent kind
Mm.
of style of ad um, that helps people, reach the right type of customer. And will that be optimal 5 years from now when we're talking about like 4 billion active AI
Mm.
users across the world? Maybe less so, right? It will feel more like consumer internet again.
Yeah.
Um, but right now, that's a reflection of where AI is product market fit. Has
Mm.
AI has product market fit, with productivity, with builders, um, and it's not, as hardcore, like more pure consumption, as let's say consumer internet over the last 15 years was focused on.
Yep. No, totally agree with you. And for some reason, this, as much as it seems like a very, very new sort of a growth tactic, just comes a lot back to the fundamentals. And it's almost, I think, the human quotient of what can happen with AI, making people talk about what they're doing and almost use of it as, I don't know, like the word of mouth marketing that was good old back then, and the same thing that's happening across social. So, yeah. I agree. Yeah. And one last bit on this, the whole discovery, growth, and engagement path that we're talking about is I'd like to understand if pricing henceforth also has a certain effect because of what was happening in the AI space. Because I think monetization is a large part of how you retain these people and make them pay for what you provide. And
Yeah.
we did speak briefly about how it's so much fluctuating right now with, oh, like there are users this week and then they drop off to use another model or they drop off to use
Yeah.
another product. So, how's this hitting in terms of pricing of these different platforms?
There's a couple of things happening. One is, in SaaS, we thought basically that we had zero marginal cost. So we
Mm,
could give away a lot of value to get into the appropriate user, the appropriate company, and then monetize the team and do all that stuff later. And depending on what type of work you're building with AI,
mm,
your cost can be quite significant to serve
yep.
free, users. And so unlike, let's say, mobile or consumer internet, a lot of the biggest growth stories have not actually been free products this generation because they just would run out of business after like, a couple months if they
Yep.
were free. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're profitable or that they're even high
Mm,
margins. Like some of these companies, even though they're paid, are still negative margin, and that might be okay. It's that their growth model just doesn't work as a free product due to the cost to support. So um, there are, a few things to think about there, which is like, all
mm,
right, well, if we look at the last cycle and how we got, mobile to many billions of users, we know it was largely free and ad supported.
mm.
A lot of pundits have basically said, oh, well, in the age of AI, we're creating so much value that people are willing to pay for it. And I don't fundamentally believe that at all. I believe this generation is going to look exactly like the last generation, largely ad supported on the biggest platforms with premium features
Yep.
and with obviously enterprises having high willingness to pay and all of that kind of stuff. And we're early enough in the cycle that you wouldn't see that because well, A, we don't really have the AI native advertising yet.
Hmm.
Um, Apparently it's coming soon.
Yeah, I think if anything, the
And
whole personalization is adding to it. Anything that feels like it's collecting a lot of our own tastes, even ChatGPT files for that matter, people speculate that all of this is going to lead, like you said, into the ads.
right. And I mean, look, no one really, even inside those companies, knows perfectly how it's going to work yet. They're going to try some stuff, they're going to see what works. But the reality is that the global internet cannot be supported by subscription models alone. And it's a very US centric view that everyone has all this like, excess
Hmm.
income to be spending on, internet products. And that's just not as true globally. So if you want to be building a truly global business, you're going to need to be finding ad support. And by the way, that's also true in the US. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
that will take the free version and they'll watch ads, right?
Hmm.
And that's the trade-off. So I do think that's where it goes long term.
Interesting.
Short term, that
Hmm.
was not a viable option for startups, of course, because they didn't have enough eyeballs to sell ads,
Hmm.
and they didn't have the unit economics to support, free growth. And that's why we've seen a much more, usage-based pricing,
Hmm.
sort of model for a lot of the companies that are growing really quickly. But I do think that reverts back to the mean of a
Yeah.
largely ad-supported internet, over the 5 to 10 year time frame. And that will, of course, be led by Google and by ChatGPT,
Yeah.
first. Um, and we'll figure out how some of these AI native ad models are different, and then that will propagate to, other places.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like a market entry positioning and then a maturity of the industry that's giving us a little bit of a head fake on how this is going to shake out. But I would bet very strongly that it's going to look
Hmm.
exactly like last generation,
Yeah.
longer term.
Yeah, I totally side with that thought too, and it's also somewhere I think today's efforts, like you mentioned, when it comes to some of these product launches, or even for that matter, browser launches, right? The fact that there's
Yeah.
AI-led browsers that's in work, and there's also like hyper personalized means of feature releases or content that's being served is all somewhere leading up to, hey, like we would show you ads, but then it's going to be like super specific for you. That's what Instagram felt like, or most of even what Spotify felt like about a decade ago when this model came into existence. And yeah, like the sustenance part is very true because when they have to think of global markets, that's like one of the options they come back into. And now it adds up as to why someone like a ChatGPT or Google Gemini would focus on actually holding users and having more usage, because if they chose to go into the ad route, I think that sheer volume is going to help them with the whole distribution part that we talk about, which I think Google already has in some sense. But yeah, ChatGPT is like just been building it over time now. So yeah,
Yes. Quite
yeah.
successfully, but yes, don't hold me.
Yeah, quite successfully for at least stopping the consumer chats when nobody was expecting it to be. But yeah, that's so true. Wow, like pretty wild times to think of from now on. But yeah, cool. In very similar lines, Casey, I have one more thought, which I'll pick your brain on the LLM search. Right now, everybody's so concerned about, oh, like has my brand showed up in LLM search, and
Yeah.
every growth team is now trying to either invest in a tool or build out their own workflows to figure out how many LLMs have mentioned them, or what is it really to work towards it. So what is, I mean, if there's a growth person listening to this, and if they are actually working on their budgets, what would you advise them to do and to not do? Like, especially when it comes to the whole acquisition and using LLMs as a means to get to that.
Yeah, so a lot of people are saying like, look, the new distribution channel is going to be, AEO, right? Like,
Yep.
answer engine optimization. And I think that's largely a trap for
Hmm.
most companies. I don't think LLMs have much interest in sharing their traffic the way Google did, for so long.
That's interesting.
So I think it's better to view those products as increasingly competitive to your core offering. So, for my area, right, which is building like
Hmm.
networks and marketplaces,
Hmm.
if those products historically won by building basically vertical specific discovery engines for travel, food,
Hmm.
transportation, etc., then like the LLMs have openly stated that they want to build agents that do just that for every vertical, right?
Right.
So we can debate whether LLMs have a chance of competing successfully there. And I
Hmm.
would say generally, if you're good technically and the vertical you play in, let's say food is high frequency, I'd bet on you building a better, more specific agent for discovery and transactions than say ChatGPT, or Google. But I think you do need to react to how the largest consumer companies are operating here. And so instead of optimizing to get my brand mention AO, which I think matters for some, higher end discovery stuff, but doesn't matter for some kind of lower
Hmm.
end, higher frequency stuff. I think you want to just be doing what the model companies are doing or planning on doing yourself, which is like you need to help your customers go agentic themselves. So if you're representing businesses, then you need to be
Hmm.
building, the agent version of that business and help them
Hmm.
integrate, with LLM tools. If you're building discovery for consumers, then you need to be building better like agentic, discovery compared to how people are going to be able to do it
Hmm.
through ChatGPT or through Gemini. Uh, and
Hmm.
if you're like less frequent, right, where the hope of you owning, that discovery part of the workflow might go away because like obviously the LMs are gonna take it,
Yeah.
then you might need to like move into more of the real world, which is like,
Hmm.
well, if let's say, and I'm not saying this will be the future, but let's say that if you're a travel company and that ChatGPT gets really good at helping you find out which place you should go travel and what hotel to stay at and what restaurants to go to. And you're like, all right, well, I'll just handle all that for you. I know your credit card information. I know your
Hmm.
preferences. I built out the whole schedule. I booked everything. There's a lot of reasons I don't necessarily believe ChatGPT is going to be able to do that. But let's say they can, right?
Hmm.
What do you do in that position if you're Expedia? What do you do in
Yeah.
that position if you're the hotel? What do you do in that position if you're the restaurant?
Hmm.
If you're the hotel or the restaurant, you're like, cool, well, I'll just have my direct integration with ChatGPT. They pay me the money. Cool, that's all
Hmm.
fine. If you're Expedia, you're like, well, will they book that through? Will ChatGPT book
Yeah.
that through Expedia? Will they try to go around me and book directly with the hotel the way Google Local started to do? And will they, even if they book directly, will they know it's from Expedia or will I get like my brand get like pushed out of that?
Yeah.
So then that's going to push a lot of these purely like software models into the real world of like, I need to have branding at the hotel you go at,
Hmm.
that this was all, done through Expedia and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so I think you've got plenty of time to figure this out because we're not switching to like all of this being, working really well inside the LLMs by like the end of next year, probably. But over a 5 year time frame,
Hmm.
this is where these companies are explicitly trying to go. Whether they get there or not, I don't know. But
Hmm.
I'd rather bet on them being competent at getting there and then
Hmm.
defending against it, like starting like today. Um, so yeah, I don't think feeding into the model companies is generally going to be that strategically
Hmm.
advantageous. If it's like, look, I'm buying a high-end travel bag and I want to research the best options. AEO is going to be great for that. You should optimize for that.
Hmm.
But for some of the bigger like venture scale stuff, they're just not going to be traffic drivers more so than they're going to be
Hmm.
people that try to disrupt your business entirely. And you want to defend against that smartly. I think the other general principle that might be helpful to think through is anytime you're thinking about growth, you
Hmm.
generally have an asset.
Hmm.
It's some defensible data, some defensible inventory, whatever. And if you're going to share that, um, the question is like, okay, I'm sharing away something differentiated that I've built, which makes it less differentiated.
Hmm.
What correspondingly do I get back in terms of growth to make that trade worth it, right?
Right. Hmm.
And so, when I was at Grubhub, it's like, okay, well, if we want to integrate with Google more deeply, what are we willing to give them? What do we want to protect? Because
Yeah.
it'll just allow them to build our business.
Yeah.
And one of the things we said is like, we're going to protect the delivery boundaries of every restaurant, right? Because if you give them that, then they could theoretically like really just rebuild our business quite quickly.
Hmm.
And at Pinterest, we had the same question of like, we're more deeply integrated with Google image search. And it's like, okay, well, what are we willing to give away to get that more traffic from Google image search and what are we not? And we basically said like, well, we can't give them all of the like repin data
Yep.
on what the most popular pins are and all that kind of stuff, because then that gives them everything to rebuild Pinterest.
Hmm.
And both of those trades worked out for growth. for both Pinterest and for Grubhub. But
Hmm.
if you're gonna be like, hey, ChatGPT, take all my data, and then they're like, cool, I took it, I trained on it, and then I'm not sending you any traffic, and I'm not giving you any value, then you're like, well, why did you just do that? You just kind of gave away your business. So
Yeah.
I think for certain businesses, a smaller percentage than people think, that trade totally makes sense. Give
Hmm.
them all your content. It helps your brand show up. It helps your brand ultimately be purchased. You don't care if it's purchased through ChatGPT or directly
Hmm.
on your website or whatever. And then for a lot of us that are trying to build direct relationships with, users, and be the real estate where they hang out at and or transact, that actually probably is going to be a
Yeah.
good trade the way it was for Google, in 2005.
Yeah. No, that's a pretty unconventional, advice, but it makes a lot of sense because I almost found that it started off as a behavioral shift, almost thinking that, oh, like, let me see if my brand is getting spotted, to now taking active efforts to sort of invest in tools or activities that would eventually have their brands listed in these AEO. And to some extent, for me, AEO reminded a lot about going back to the good old days of, I don't know, like answering comment threads on Reddit or doing something that just would possibly do good to your brand and not literally like a tactic, because all of that tied back to in some ways making the community see your product or making it more discoverable. But I guess
Yeah.
now it's just like going a very anti route where you're trying to almost engineer something, like engineer or plant something that probably not through the right ways, but then it almost feels like, I don't know, you're cheating your game or you're like going around it. And the point you mentioned was
Yeah.
very interesting about the competitiveness, like where this could eventually be guarded, but not as open world as what Google's SEO was like decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think Google made a change um philosophically during mobile days, whereas, when
Hmm.
they launched on, consumer internet, they're basically like, it's our job to get you to the best place to solve your problem as fast as possible, right?
Hmm.
And in mobile, because mobile web was really slow early on, and
Hmm.
because it was harder to browse all the links, I think their users came to them and were like, why aren't you just telling me the answer? Why aren't you just giving me the solution? So they shifted strategically to being like, okay, whenever we're not answering the question directly and having to send you somewhere else to do a vertical search, we failed,
Yep.
in the eyes of our customers. And then they started building competitors to a lot of the companies that they used to send a ton of traffic. They built the
Hmm.
travel search product,
Yep.
to compete with Expedia. They built a local search product to compete with Yelp, right? And it doesn't mean those businesses went out of business, but now they find Google as this like traffic driver, but also
Hmm.
competitor, right? And I think LLMs ratchet up that relationship more significantly. So again, if you're a D2C e-commerce brand, nothing changes. I want to rank as high as I can on Google.
Yeah.
I want to rank as high as I can on ChatGPT. If they
Hmm.
offer me options to pay to reach more people, I'll spend money
Yeah.
on those the same way I spend a ton of money on meta ads. No
Right.
problem.
Right.
But if you were a vertical solution
Hmm.
for discovery,
Hmm.
um, you can't say like, well, I'm just going to optimize for AEO because it's like
Yep.
ChatGPT doesn't want you there. They just want to solve that discovery problem directly for every
Yeah.
possible problem. And yeah, there might be like a app,
Hmm.
call that you can make in the short term, but then, they're going to be like, well, why do I need the app? Now I have the payment information. Now I know all the preferences. I don't need to tool call, Expedia anymore. I
Hmm.
don't need to tool
Hmm.
call DoorDash anymore. And so, me personally, I wouldn't feed into getting them to that future if I were running one of those companies. Those founders are a lot smarter than I am about their businesses, but
Yeah.
I don't, doesn't feel like the trade is worth it. And if you're
Yeah.
purely a content game, then the content game with Google, which made sense for, maybe 10, 15 years and didn't make as much sense for the last five, it's like, okay, well, I give you my content and then you send people to my page and then I show them
Yeah.
ads and that's how I make
Correct.
money.
Yeah.
And then Google started answering the questions directly using your content around 5 years ago.
Yep.
And a lot of businesses like kind of went poof when that happened.
Hmm.
And the LLM products are basically just an extension of that. So if you're big enough, yeah, you
Hmm.
can get some sort of licensing deal like Reddit or the New York Times or whatever. But if you're not, then yeah, then they just take your content. They don't give you any traffic. The trade doesn't make sense. So I think you're going to see a lot more people protect their
Hmm.
content over the next decade because, these companies aren't offering them a reason to share it. And maybe they'll figure out a
Yep.
scalable,
Hmm.
profit share based on content used, but right now they're in not a very strong position to do that. And they may feel
Right.
like they don't need.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. And they could use all this time to figure out what in that world could their distribution or their tactic look like. And I mean, taking a step back, it also seems to be very different mindset for, let's say, a SaaS versus a consumer internet sort of a company. Because what I'm hearing a lot in SaaS these days is, oh yeah, like it makes so much sense to make something as an MCP, or actually like make it more a tool call within these LLMs, or make it more
Yeah.
accessible through these interfaces, because people are increasingly accepting the fact that someone actually making the conscious effort to go to an interface, log in, do a bunch of actions might probably like reduce in behavior. And
Yeah.
also to the same point that you mentioned, companies like Salesforce and whoever has this I guess the data heavy platform as such, they're the incumbents investing in their own workflows and their own agents to say, oh, like since we have your data, this is like the most best, workflows you would end up using instead of a very normalized
Yeah.
AI
Yeah.
agent. So, but this is very different from like the consumer examples that you were bringing through, which is, yeah, like beware of the whole AEO side of things versus a SaaS is also like becoming more conducive to, I guess, the LLMs than what these
Yeah.
marketplaces would look like.
On the SaaS side, right? So I think there's a few things to think about whether you're incumbent or whether you're a
Mm,
startup, right? And if SaaS is going to be a considered purchase for your customer, then you
mm,
need to show up where they research those decisions. And that's definitely going to be these tools, right? So you
yeah,
can't opt out of that.
correct.
And so beyond that, then there's going to be, does is work being done in these tools related to my business drive better engagement, deeper
Mm,
integration, or worse, right?
mm,
And in the short term with MCP, it basically means people are accessing my data, my tools, my core value in more places, and that
yeah.
feels great. And a symbol of pretty much every SaaS company's product market fit, and something you have to spend significant time on post product market fit is integrations,
Yep.
because all of us that use SaaS tools want to use it with
Mm,
our other SaaS tools. And
mm,
when you get really big, you try to be the suite that just is all of the SaaS tools. But early on, as a startup, you can't do that. So, one way to test if a SaaS business has product market fit is if they have a dedicated
yeah.
integration page. If they do, they
Yep.
probably have product market fit. Um, so take a company like Notion, right?
Yep.
They have a bunch of integrations, and now that they're really, really large, they're starting to launch dedicated versions of those things they might have integrated with in the past, whether that's calendar or email or things like
Yep.
that. And they can be in a position where um, they don't have to win those spaces to be successful. They can compete in
Mm,
those spaces and get some extra value, some extra revenue, some
mm,
better retention. But also, if you decide to use another tool, it might be okay as long as you're using it with Notion, right?
correct. Yeah.
Uh, and so that's the difference between like what do I need to own versus what do I need to
Mm,
compete for to get extra value.
yeah.
And for startups, I think the question comes back to like, okay, well, clearly I'm part of a workflow that includes a bunch of these other tools. And then the question is like, do I have enough of a core that's going to keep me well positioned in the workflow
Mm,
for my customer? Or does me integrating over the long term mean that like my part of the workflow gets commoditized into the bigger tool? It could be Notion, it could be ChatGPT, it could be, Microsoft, Google Docs, whatever.
mm,
And that's the core thing to think about, right? So,
mm,
and that's going to be a custom question for every one of these
yeah.
like SaaS startups coming up that's AI native, um, as to like, okay, I'm feeling pressure to integrate because my customers want it, but does that integration over a 5-year time frame leave me in a stronger defensible
Mm,
position or a weaker defensible position? And if so, I might still need to do it, but I need to do other things to like
mm.
counteract it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, but that makes sense, right? Because you invest a lot of time, especially if you're a startup and you invest so much time in sort of a custom integration, but that doesn't scale beyond like what, 5 to 10 people, then that's not really going to give you like a
Also
long
not worth the
term,
effort. Yes.
yeah, not worth the effort for sure. And this also brings me to what popularly I think in the X lingo and LinkedIn lingo was called as the wrapper companies, because everybody who is building something that's easily, I guess, like I guess the taken over, or I wouldn't say replaced, because now, as you rightly pointed out, a lot of these workflows can be integrated well within a larger incumbent or within another kind of a startup in just a couple of weeks time.
Yeah.
It used to be months before, but now it's like just a matter of weeks. So if I'm a founder today and I have to think about the impact of not just the short term but also the long term, is there something that you would tell folks to think of, especially with respect to I don't know, like getting copied by or getting sucked into an existing ecosystem of other players as well?
Yeah, so I think the key question is, where am I building compounding advantage, in
Mm.
my product in my company, right? And, for SuperMe, that's a pretty easy one. It's like we're building cross-site network effects. We're
Mm.
helping you discover the best people, on certain business problems, whether you want to hire them, whether you want to get on a call with them, whatever, as we get more and more people, even if someone copies the product, they're not going to have, the network we have, right? And that's what dominated some of the biggest outcomes in consumer
Mm.
internet, but also in B2B, over the last 15 years. The Shopify's of the world,
Yep.
the Salesforce of the world. They're actually giant network effect businesses. Those are platforms, obviously
Mm.
companies like, Pinterest, whatnot, DoorDash are cross-site network effect businesses.
Yeah.
Or yeah. Uh, so in if you're a startup, right, and you find something that's product market fit, the next question is like, well, how do I sustain it over the long term, right? And uh, incumbents are way more on top of things
Mm.
than they used to be. They've all read Clayton Christensen. They don't want to be disrupted. Um, it's easier to build than ever before. We all have Claude Code or Cursor,
Yep.
right? So that makes it easier to copy.
Mm.
So um, a lot of times your product market fit is just a market entry strategy into opening up some more pieces on the board that can move you into a more defensible
Mm.
position, longer term. So then the question is like, well, what are you moving toward that's
Yeah.
going to, fortify your walls around your customers, fortify your walls around like revenue and margin and all of that kind of stuff. And
Mm.
historically, there's been a few ways you would do that, your which is your classic, like, okay, network effects, switching cost, brand, economies
Yeah.
of scale, all these kind of things. And some of these don't feel relevant in an age of AI.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
wait, how am I going to get to economies of scale faster than
Yep.
Google? Like, that doesn't feel like a realistic conversation we can have, as a startup. Brand doesn't feel like a realistic conversation because brand in software is usually just rooted in the product
Mm.
experience and how delightful it is.
Yep.
And so I would almost like take brand and shift it to like taste.
Mm.
So it's like, well, if I can deliver products at higher taste value,
Right.
and I can replicate that into more and more spaces, that will probably create some, we can call it rational or irrational
Mm.
preference towards my stack versus an incumbent stack or another startup stack,
I
right?
think granola is a good example of that, as I think of like
Which one?
granola is a good example of that. Like, I guess when Otter and a bunch of these other tools were just ruling over, granola had that design, the taste that it could have its
100%.
own. Yeah. Yeah.
So essentially, if that creates some brand preference there, but that product is a feature in our broader
Mm.
workflow solution we're all using, what are they going to leverage both that wedge and
Mm.
that brand preference into to create a large, defensible, iconic company? I don't know what the answer is, but I hope they make a strong one and execute on it well and have enough time to do it. But
Yep.
that's a great example. I feel like there's going to be many other examples where like, and a lot of this is how Apple has played the game in the
Yep.
last few cycles. It's like, oh, there's a space. Everyone's in it, but their products are kind of crappy. And we just
Mm.
show people what like a truly well-developed product experience in that space is, and then we win. I don't know if Apple can do that again in AI, but it's certainly what they did with mobile phones.
Yep.
Um, and that worked out pretty well for them. So, but then the problem with taste compared to other forms of
Mm.
defensibility is once the taste is shown,
Mm.
other people are like, oh, yeah, that is better. Can I reverse engineer it and copy
Yep.
it?
Yep.
And sometimes that's really hard to do. Apple's so
Mm.
deeply vertically integrated with the chips and the design of the hardware and the design of the software, right? That's been pretty difficult to replicate. If you're a purely SaaS business, you know, you can like clone the thing. Now, you might be cargo culting, cloning the wrong components, and not really understanding the core
Mm.
underneath. But a lot of times, people that aren't good enough to develop themselves, once they see it, they're like, "Well, I understand the core elements beneath that made it better, and I can copy that effectively." So that's something to watch out for. But I think those
Mm.
would be the sort of founders I would bet on. Is that, well, if you could do it once,
Yep.
your chances of doing it twice, three times, and then at creating eventual compounding advantage and defensibility is probably there.
Mm. Yeah. This is so true, and I think to add on to the copying the taste part, I'd also say that there's one thing to copy, and the other thing is to own up what you've copied, right? A lot of people fail at that position where it's kind of easier to say, oh, like, yeah, let's go and build out a linear like web page, which everybody did at that point in time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then there's no like owning up to that standard or owning up
Well,
to that
I'll
taste.
give you I'll give you the negative interpretation from the last generation, right?
Mm.
So when Dropbox became really large and got to like 1 billion in revenue, the top three companies were like, all right, that's enough. Apple built iCloud,
Mm.
Microsoft built OneDrive, and Google built Google Drive. And did that kill Dropbox's business? No, but they certainly asymptoted after that, right? Same with Instagram and Snapchat. They're
Yep.
like, all right, I see your stories thing. If I
Mm.
build that for rest of world faster than you get to rest of world, I cap your ability to get to, 1 billion users, right? And they
Yep.
did do that effectively.
Mm.
Um, so the incumbents are smarter about, doing that well, and they're just doing it a lot faster this cycle
Yep.
than they did last cycle,
That's
right?
true. Yep.
So, Glean hits 100 million in
Mm.
revenue, and then everyone's like, okay, I need to
Mm.
stop that now. I'm not going to wait until you get to 1 billion, right?
Yep.
That so far has not stopped Glean revenue growth, thankfully. But yeah, the companies are just like, all right,
Right.
I see the wedge happening a lot quicker now. I can
Mm.
react a lot quicker now. I'm incentivized to react a lot quicker now as
Mm.
well.
Right. And the resources to get to there is also like a lot quicker now because of access to a lot of these tools. So yeah, very, very contextual in that sense. And to like come and zoom into SuperMe, for example, I love
Mhm.
how we're talking about the whole AI slop, but there's also this complete human knowledge and how you're making LLM access this human knowledge with SuperMe. I'd love to understand more around like what prompted you to build this and what exactly has been the most, I guess, the what turned out to be surprising for you as an artifact, which gave you like super high signal because you're building these profiles with so many tons of high operators. So, what's been the most surprising turnover for you from all of building this out with all of them in the circle?
Yeah, so I think some of the things that we saw that, made us want to jump to this is that um, a lot of sharing of like business knowledge between peers has moved off of the public internet over the last 10
Mm,
years to like private chat groups or Slacks.
yeah.
So it feels like the best knowledge on solving business problems has moved, increasingly away from something that, a normal person can find.
Mm,
And the reasons for that, right? Like X or LinkedIn, they've rewarded more, viral content, more recently, less nuance. If you share something, that's a little bit different, you might get a bunch of like harassment, right? So that's like moved it. Um, and then when you couple that with like, well, now these LLM products are indexing all the publicly available knowledge, but new business insights are not being shared with the public internet
mm,
anymore. You're like, well, what does this mean for our ability to kind of, make the best business knowledge, transparent, right? And the other thing that bothered me about the shift is that as we switch away from Google search into LLMs, it moves from 10 blue links to an answer. And answers are
mm,
like really great for facts. But in the
yeah.
business world, we prefer to hear multiple perspectives and then make
Mm,
up our own mind. And so you're kind of losing multiple perspectives as blue links, shift to answers. So what we were trying to do is say like, well, how can we be back to indexing the best cutting edge knowledge from the best business operators
mm,
And how do we make it easier to view the multiple perspectives so that you as a founder, you as a product manager, you as a designer can make up your own mind
Yep.
with all the best information. And so that's how we designed, SuperMe, up front. I think what surprised us about the usage
Mm.
is I think we anticipated, the first version of SuperMe is you would come, would ask your AI profile, you would ask my AI profile, or you would ask search, and you would ask, sort of a generic question like, hey, how should I compute my activation rate? Or, hey, how do I understand if I like have liquidity in my marketplace, right? And you'd get an answer that's going to be sourced from my content. So you're going to
Mm.
know it's not hallucinating. If it's something I don't know anything about, the AI profile is going to be like, I don't know anything about that. It's not going to hallucinate.
Yep.
Instead, what happened is people would come in and they drop like 3 paragraphs about their business. They'd be like, I'm working at this Series B fintech company and I have this
Right.
problem and here are my metrics. And when that happens, what our product can do is go agentic in delivering the solution. It cannot just say, well, here's how to calculate an
Yeah.
activation rate. It
Mm.
can say, your activation rate metric should be X. Here is how to calculate it. Here are the things you probably need to do, given the context I understand about your business, to improve it specifically.
Mm.
And we just didn't think people were going to do that early on. We thought that was like
Yep.
something that would merge 2, 3 years down the line. I think
Mm.
what we failed to anticipate is that all of our users are early adopters of LLM products. That's why they're trying us.
Yep.
They know better prompting means better answers. And so we're giving a lot much more personalized advice through the AI
Right.
profile
Mm.
than we anticipated. I think what surprised us on the, we'd call it, the supply side, the people that are getting a bunch of questions, is
Mm.
that we designed it in a way where like the AI profile is always going to answer on your behalf.
Yep.
And you want to check in on it, make sure the answer's right, chime in every once in a
Mm.
while to improve it, to train the model the next time
Mm.
that question gets asked. But what's happening a lot of the times is there are people that used to get too many emails, too many questions on social media, etc. So now they're sending people to their SuperMe's. And what we're finding is that they used to be like, look, I just would never have gotten to these emails. But now they're like, the fact that the AI answers on my behalf actually means I can chime in as well because the AI has done 90% of the work.
Right.
So it allows me to put a personal touch on way
Mm.
more of these, way more of this outreach than I could in the past. And that I didn't really anticipate in how people were going to use the product.
Mm.
That's been really cool also to see.
Very nice. I know you folks had a beta launch very recently. Like, is it open for other folks to try globally?
Yeah, so it all
Awesome.
works self-serve. You can sign up, you can create a profile, you can, search, you can have conversations, all of it's
Right.
available.
Right. Awesome. I'm going to like link that up in the show notes. Would love for folks to check it out for sure. Casey, thank you so much. This has been exciting. And I had such a fun time discussing and, in fact, dissecting all of what's happening around in the AI space now with respect to growth. And I think otherwise as well in terms of how these business plans play out in the longer run. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. See you.